Welcome to the podcast. Before I get going, I'd like to take a moment to just thank my editor extraordinaire, 𝗣ঁ 𝗶𝗶𝗀𝗲. She does a great job for us inserting all of these photos and graphs and making sure this all works reasonably well. Both of us are coming down a learning curve in this particular art form called a podcast, and we have a lot of fun doing it, so I hope you'll enjoy. In this episode and the next one of the Fit Professional 1 podcast, I'm thrilled to bring you a world-class athlete named 𝗣ঁ 𝗂𝗶𝗀𝗀. He is a world champion cross-country mountain biker, and now he's a coach of Olympians and pros. And we get to spend some time with him understanding the concept of toughness and mental toughness as it relates to sport and how it might roll over into your particular profession and life in general. Part one, we're going to spend some time going over the concept of adaption and how important being consistent over time in your deliberate practice drives that home and ultimately helps you get the adaptions that you need to get the performance gains that you want. Over the course of that discussion, we'll absolutely be bringing in how these concepts roll over into not just the sporting part of your life, but really your career and all parts of your life. It's really going to be a good deal. Next, we're going to spend some time on focus. 𝗣ঁ has a unique perspective on focus. I can't wait for him to share with you. Followed by the observation with 𝗣's vast experience over time that coaches have a holy grail. And what it is trying to figure out what the right amount of training is. If you undertrain, you don't get the adaption. If you overtrain, you get into a fatigue zone. So finding that over time, not only in the sporting aspect of your life, but also in your career and your life in general can be very beneficial. I think you're really going to enjoy what 𝗣ঁ has to say about that. Then in part one, near the end, we will start to get into the concept of mental toughness and listen to how 𝗣ঁ quantifies this and uses it to his advantage, not only in cycling, but life in general. It's an amazing observation and gives you some great techniques that you can use along the way. And then finally, to close out part one, 𝗣ঁ will start his discussion on what a level 1, a level 2, and a level 3 athlete are and how those work to really drive you toward enjoying the process and embracing the process more than the outcome. And by doing that, you actually start to get the outcomes you're after. It's really an interesting discussion. So without further ado, let's get to it. So with that, 𝗣ঁ gave me a little background. He's a full-time coach specializing in endurance and ultra-endurance cycle coaching for athletes at all levels, offering coaching in mountain bike and road cyclists from all over the world. It's pretty cool that his current clients include an ex-Olympian, 2 world champions, and a bunch of prominent age groupers, all kind of burning it up in their respective races. And I imagine that's kind of all over the world as well. His related performance includes 3 years consulting for 𝗣आह𝗿 regional coach for British cycling, and 6 years as a race team manager and head coach. He's originally known as an ultra endurance mountain biker and really was the benchmark for ultra athletes in the UK in the mid-2000s. His results include, 139 race victories, a Masters world title, and numerous ultra cycling records. He's also, I think this is pretty cool, featured in really all the major cycling magazines, a couple of books, and even a film. And then also was inducted into the UK Mountain Bike Hall of Fame in 2013. He started being a coach and his journey began in 1995. And he has the knowledge and experience that really comes with doing that job for just a long, long time. And I've experienced that personally. Full disclosure, 𝗣ঁ is my coach of about 2 years now, and that's really cool. And besides me, he's helped just a ton of athletes exceed their personal dreams and ambitions over the years. But he just doesn't coach athletes. He's also been kind of the coach's coach, bringing 9 coaches in particular to prominence, as well as mentored them along the way. And as a result, has built just a really cool and effective coaching business. So with that, 𝗣ঁ, boy, it's great to have you here with us today. And I know the listeners and me as well are just dying to hear about your journey across all of this and really what brought you here today. So Let's hear it. What's the story?
How length of version do you want?
Oh, we want the long one. We want the cool one. Yeah.
I just say, yeah, it's really great to be on. Thanks for having me on the podcast. My journey, I like to think of my journey really as being a bit of being in the right place at the right time, not too forced or pre-planned, something that kind of developed over time as the sport evolved and as I evolved as a person, as an athlete, and as a coach. Before mountain biking, I was into skateboarding. So that was my first passion, was skateboarding. It was very, my world was really quite small. I lived in a small town in the Midlands in the UK. Parents who were very supportive, but who had to work very hard. It wasn't that we were poor, but we weren't wealthy either. They worked really hard to provide me and my sister with as many opportunities as they could. And they gave us the right balance between discipline and thinking about your future and actually enjoying now and doing things you want to do and having that freedom to explore the world or explore your part of the world or what you wanted to try. So, skateboarding was really not, sort of a vigilante sport or something. It wasn't popular at all. It wasn't mainstream. It was, and it probably still is now. It had a sort of a bad boy image at the time, but that didn't stop my parents from supporting me, taking me to skate parks before I was able to drive and that sort of thing. And a lot of it was really, I go to school, often skateboard to school. One of the teachers there, the PE teacher, used to let us skate in the hall if it was wet before school in the PE hall. And there was a group of us, and we were really, I say a group, there was like 5 or 6 of us. And we were kind of the outcast kids. And if I'm in the majority, I'm probably in the wrong place. So that kind of appealed to me in the early day. And then skateboarding started to grow and it started to become more mainstream. And also the competition, I started to do competitions, street competitions and mini ramp and small bowl competitions. And it started to morph from something that was really judged on how good you were to being judged on whether you did the right things that were currently on trend. And being part of the majority within skating didn't sit with me really at all. And at the same time, another friend of mine he used to race karts. He's a very good kart racer, motor karts. And he'd had quite an accident in the kart, and that had seriously put him off, not wanting to die in his late teens in a kart. He'd started mountain biking, which was this new exciting thing. The World Championships, they'd only just had the first World Championships, and it was before mountain biking was accepted as a cycling discipline by the UCI. So again, it wasn't mainstream in any way, and it was kind of new, exciting. And one holiday, he said to me, "Oh, what are you doing? Do you want to come mountain biking? You can use my old bike. I've got a new bike." And I went mountain biking and discovered all these things that were between the normal of life. So I'd kind of got into that. I'd always felt that there was a big gap in life from what I could see, like as admirable as it was. I looked at, the people I knew, my parents' friends, and so on and so forth. And I'm like, you get up, you go to work, you come home, you make dinner, you put your kids to bed, you get up, you go to work. I'm like, there must be more to life. And I started cycling, not really looking to be a great cyclist. I started cycling with my friend and discovered, oh, wow, there isn't just city centres and town centres and a road that leads me. I hop on this road, I go to that road, and I go to that road, and then I'm in the next city. There's all these forests and, these just hidden places with big lakes. And, we just ride into the woods and jump into the lake. And, and that really, although my parents had involved us in the outdoors. We hadn't gone deep outdoors, if you like, on a consistent basis. And so this was suddenly in quite contrast for me. And that's really what got me hooked, was that feeling that it was something different to everyday life. I was good at school. I was academically quite bright, or able to absorb things quickly and understand, but I didn't enjoy it. So I wasn't academic, you know, I was creative. So then my background is actually, my first career was in print. So at school, I liked art. Didn't really like any of the academic subjects, although I could do them all when I got my grades. Went to college, did art. At some point, started to realize that I would have to make a living. At some point, my parents were no longer gonna support me, and I would have to make a living. And so looked at art and was just like, yeah, that's sort of a road to poverty, and didn't fancy it. And that morphed into photography, and then art and design, and then print. And then I could see the commercial. I was doing graphic design, and I remember distinctly getting to the end of my graphic design national diploma, I think it was, and going and finding the directory for graphic design companies. All right, I'm send a CV out. Shall I go to work, or shall I do a degree? And realizing that there were more courses for graphic design than there were graphic design companies in the UK. So every single company has to take 30 people on every year. I'm okay at graphic design, but I'm not excelling at graphic design. So now my odds are bad. So went into print. Print was better, way better. And I did a commercial course that took me into a job. By then I discovered cycling. And for me, it was really, when we think of, you know, the subject we're going to talk about today, and the progression and setting goals and all this sort of thing, the main difference I see between the majority of athletes who I see now who come to me and my development, which is something that I know works, and when I've implemented that as a model for other people or got them to think that way, it's always worked, is that we had so little information. You know, there wasn't all these races that were instant. You didn't have dots to track, and you didn't have all this exposure to all these people who are winning these races. A magazine came out once a month with some results in the back, and they were 2 months out a date, and there was one interview with one pro in a magazine, and you got 12 editions in a year. When I wanted information about how to train, there really wasn't much. And, you know, I used to we lived on a main line that was a couple of hours out of London, and the bookshops in regular places in the UK, you couldn't get a book about training. You couldn't even order one. Like, what book is it, you know? So I used to go to a place called Sporting Pages. I used to catch the train to London for 2 hours, catch the tube, walk across, order a book. We'll phone you when it comes in, catch the train back. 2 weeks later, we've got this book for you. Catch the train in. You know, that was performance back then. British cycling did not have a performance plan. You know, we didn't have, World's team was just basically, it was all amateur back in that day, you know. So there wasn't really all these things to make me think, yeah, I want to be world champion, or I want to go and do the transcontinental, or, you know. So for me, it was really, in many respects, I was kind of saved from the pitfalls that I see other people have now, in that my world was this big. And when I started with my first coach, he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be faster than my friends, you know. And that was something that was
goal, right?
that was above how good I was, but it wasn't over here somewhere. So that step to that step, that's always how my progression has been. It's been, and it hasn't started, I want to be world champion. 3 or 4 years in, when I got my elite license, I realized one day I'd like to be national champion. But when I did my goal setting with my coach that year, I didn't say I wanted to be national champion. And he's like, I don't know if you're thinking big enough. And I'm like, I do think big enough, but I want to succeed in something I'm
Sure.
possibly capable of this year. So what is it you really want? One day I want to be national champion. So I told my coach that back in 96. In 2022, I did it for the first time.
Wow.
You know, so for me, it's really the bit that really rung true, you know, when I was looking through the stuff you sent me, and particularly Magnus's book, it's that understanding of who you are and what your capabilities are, and marrying them up to what you're capable of and what the outcome is. And that's toughness. And so if your goal is there and you're there instead of this one here, you can develop the toughness because you've got plenty of time to do it. You've got one whole year to get from here to here, and it's possibly feasible today. It might not be, but it possibly is. But if you train properly for a year, you can perceive it as totally capable, and you build strength as you go. When I was there, I want to beat my friends. Well, now I want my sport license. Now I want my expert license. Now I want my elite license. You know, so now I'm here. And this is kind of, for me, that's how my pathway has always been. The same with my coaching. You know, my coaching journey, when I started my coaching journey, I didn't realize I was starting my coaching journey. So the guys who convinced me to come and help teach skills for them, for mountain bikers. So one of them was coaching me. They were like the prominent guys in the country who were leading the development of cycle coaching in the UK. And I mean, at the time, one of them was coaching a young junior whose name was 𝗣𝗿𝗂𝗀. The other guy was writing a lot of the syllabus for what is the ABCC now. And as those guys moved on, they did the same thing, and they wrote a lot of the syllabus that the British cycling coaches write now. But we didn't know any of that was coming, you know. And so I started in 93, and now like the British cycling performance plan didn't start till like 2007 or something. So, and even then, that was, you know, when you talk to the guys now, how did they get their first coaches? Well, one of the guys rang up all the other guys who were elite. do you fancy being a coach? You know, well, what do I do? Teach people how to do what you do. Okay. You know, so the journey for me as a coach is very similar to the journey as a racer, is in that the final goals of I want to be brilliant or whatever, they didn't really exist. There wasn't a career path. I was in print. This was my hobby. So, you know, and my hobby developed and developed and developed and developed and developed to the point where I cut right out from print and design, went into the bike trade because it was fun and easy and there was way less pressure, and I could build my coaching while I was doing that. And even to that degree, my coaching development and my coaching business was growing kind of by stealth without me really realizing where it was. And I was still working in a bike shop, and people are like, oh, Rob used to go in the bike shop. And the you know, two businesses I worked for, the owner and his wife, because they were both like couples, so they got a bit worried because I was spending more than my wages in the shop. Because I didn't really, you know, I'd reached a point where I didn't really need the wage from the shop, but these things kind of happen over stealth over time, you know. And I think that's, for me, why am I, you know, last year I went and I did the national championships, you know, and on paper, I should not finish anywhere near where I did. Like, you know, if you take me now and me when I retired like 12 years ago or whatever it is now, 15 years ago, is it? Something like that. You know, I'm like a good 10 kilos heavier. My threshold is lower. You know, my skills are good. My bravery is not as high. You know, my self-preservation it works really well. Yeah. You know, but there's certain things. The main thing is understanding what the discipline actually entails, and understanding what mental toughness really means in that environment, in that arena, you know, and being able to really, it's almost like, you know, then I was really light and I was fit and I could hit all these numbers, but I didn't really understand what it meant to do the event and what success required. and I wasn't embraced with that. What is it you actually have to do and accept? And that's the bit, is understanding who you are and what you can accept, and accepting what the event actually is. So there's a lot of denial goes on, I see, with lots of athletes, that it's going to be brilliant, and and they've fallen in love with the images they see online, and the guy with the grainy hands on Rafa, who's done the TCR, and it's just like, the reality of doing a bikepacking race is, it's horrible. Like, it's horrible. The guys who do really well, they know it's horrible. They go there expecting it to be horrible, and they expect to want to quit all the time. They know that's coming, so they don't quit. And so yeah, my development in both cycling, coaching, my business, it's all been a little bit of luck, right place at the right time. Cycling was building, particularly in this country and the USA, where the majority of my customers do come from North America or Europe, but it was UK initially was the sort of lion's share of building my business. Cycling, if it was still as it was back in the dark ages when I started, I wouldn't be doing this full time for a living, because the customer base just simply wouldn't be there. So some of it is luck, and I completely accept that. And some of it is just time in the game and taking the time to actually think, what is it that makes people successful? And, for me, I've always questioned everything. And I think that sort of came from one of my first coaches. He was like, you need to listen to everything. You need to absorb everything. And then you have to decide what's true or what's real for your scenario, and understand that everybody's scenario is slightly different. And if you can do that, you can probably coach. There's other elements, of course, but yeah. So that's my story, rambling.
That's really cool.
We can dig into any bit of that you want to.
It's outstanding. First of all, there's a lot in there. It's interesting. Do you believe in luck or not? Right place at the right time, but you were prepared, and you were also aligned your passion, what became a passion with you, with what you're able to do. And I think we'll get to talking about that too, how powerful that is, and making sure that you stick to things and make them happen, because there's nothing easy, certainly about business. You got to have more in the account at the end of the period than when you started. That can be tough. And that is part of what I'm trying to do as a Fit Professional One, with a tribe of professionals. We're professionals first. We have to have a means to live by. We have to provide for our families. We have to do all these things, and there's innate pressures in there. And as we've shared via emails a long time, and for me, it's been absolutely foundational and a requirement to keep the physical portion, which parlays into the emotional and mental portion, which you talked about too. Those guys that are super talented, that know going in, they're going to reach a point where they want to quit. So I really want to I want you to describe that kind of thing for us too, as it goes. This might be a good time to interject my hypothesis. I call it the intensity multiplier principles. And today we're going to talk about toughness. I have 16, and each one has 2 components. And the reason I did that was really because they're very complex. Toughness is unbelievably complex, and it's hard to encapsulate all of it. So really what I'm after is, what are the big levers of control? What can you pay attention to and get the biggest gain? And so what I put together is really my roughly 40 years of being a professional, trying to stay in shape and seeing that roll over into the rest of my life. I've just noticed patterns, and that's what engineers do. We, especially industrial engineers like me, we notice patterns, we create a hypothesis, and then we try something. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. You fall flat on your face, but then you try again. And over time, I've landed on these principles. And for me, they're largely hypothetical in nature and very interesting. So today, I appreciate you being here, because it's actually a way to scrub it, this particular one of toughness. And that's what I want to do over time. And hopefully we'll add research and such. But for the viewer, you'll see a graph come up on the screen about now. But for the rest of you listening, imagine the good old mathematics, simple two-axis. On the horizontal axis, we have pain. On the vertical, we have force. So I've defined the upper right quadrant as where you want to be. In other words, positive force drives positive pain. And if you'll imagine, there's a line out in that quadrant kind of to the upper right, which starts upper left and falls to the lower right. And beyond that force and pain, because we know this about humans, and frankly, we could use the word failure in physics, but for humans, if we have too much force, too much pain, we get injured. So injury happens. So the point is there is some line that is for real. And what I've experienced over time is as you train, that line moves out a little bit, but it's not infinite. I mean, we're a human, we have limits, and you end up getting hurt. What also is really interesting on that graph, if you will, is if you go, what is negative force and what is negative pain? I just love kind of wrapping my head around that. So negative pain might be pleasure. And I want to actually explore when negative pain is actually functional. So I'm thinking recovery, which I'm actually kind of bad at and I need to get better at. And then there's also things like maybe a massage, unless they're going really deep tissue, then that's not pleasurable, but it's very functional. Yeah. The other way, like negative force, what is that? Maybe it's someone doing something for you, but pretty much the lower quadrant to the left is weakness. It results in being weak. It results in not being mentally tough because you're not exercising. So that's another hypothesis that I think proves out in experience in many, many authors and coaches like you, that if we don't work on it, we lose it. And you also can injure it. I think I may have experienced that recently last August. You can maybe go more than you should, and then you got to work it back. Similar in a way to if you break an arm, even after it's healed, you still have to do physical therapy to make it work, etc. So that's the lens, if you will, that we want to discuss. There's one more axis that is predominantly important in every one of my principles. And that, if you can imagine an axis, again, a third one that would come through the horizontal or diagonal, that's time. And time is really quite interesting when we're talking about force and pain. We also both read a book by Steve Magnus called Do Hard Things, which we're going to reference. He covers a lot of cool stuff in here. And there's another book that a friend recommended that I just finished for that lower quadrant, really, and it's called The Comfort Crisis, and really does a nice job talking about how, frankly, if you don't do anything, you become weak. And it can be a crisis both for an organization, and we want to talk a little bit about that today too. How do these principles actually parlay into the rest of our life? Because I use way back being a student athlete, and now being a fit professional, which means I'm an amateur trying to get personal best. It's just so productive. And we really want to cover why that rolls over. You mentioned Magnus. What are some of the, maybe a principle that really resonates with you, that aligns with your experience coaching and as an athlete?
It was the one that really stood out for me was his definition of toughness, in that you really need two things to marry up for you to get the right result and the result you're looking for, which is an understanding of yourself and where you currently are, and the task in hand and what it entails. And so and this affects everything from, he has a great start to a chapter in there where he describes what's essentially pacing, and he describes the children setting off for the mile race, and they all set off at a flat out sprint. And then they get one lap around this track that they've got to do 8 laps or something, and realize how far it is. And they don't slow down a little bit, they slow down a lot. And this is really a lack of understanding of both. They probably understand themselves much more, but they didn't understand the task at all. And so they're suddenly overwhelmed at that point. And this really, for me, is it's almost like the foundation of the entire job. I always say, like, the reason I've won so many races is because so many people are appalling at pacing themselves. And it comes from a misunderstanding of what they need to do during the event and how long the event will last and how the event will feel, married up to how they feel right now, but how that equates if they keep going at this pace. You know, and so I don't know if I'm just like completely blessed in that department. I've often wondered this because pacing never really was a problem for me. Like I didn't have to, it was almost like I never had to learn it. I've, you know, fought many times, I fought back and I've gone, when have I got pacing wrong? Like when's the earliest day of getting pacing wrong? And it's just like, I can't find it. Like it, you know, when I did cross country for the first time and it's just like, yeah, maybe I went too hard for like the first 5 minutes, but I didn't go too hard for like half of it and then blow up. You know, I didn't, which is really common. You know, first time I did a 10-mile time trial, no, that didn't end badly. That was the start and the finish were fairly similar paces. You know, maybe I started, you know, we had heart rate monitors, we didn't have power meters. I imagine if we had a power meter, you'd go, no, you want to take 200 watts off the first 10 seconds or something. I go further back and it's just like, well, before, when I was still at school, I ran cross country and it's just like, it was almost like I ran metronomically all the way from the start to the beat. You know, I didn't try and get rid of everyone at the start. People were ahead of me, but I would catch them and I would pass them. And so, well, I may go back to like junior school with the egg and spoon race and the 50-meter dash. And it's just like, what was exactly the same? Like, for some reason, there's something inside me that's always understood pace. But the biggest challenge for me as a coach is when you realize that's not normal. Most people are not like that at all. No. So really, the thing in the book that resonated for me was to be tough, you have to understand what the task is and you have to choose a task that is going to push you, but is possible. And then you have to go into that task in a way that you understand what all the implications are and what the pitfalls are and what to do when you feel X, Y, and Z. And some of that comes with experience. And that's why I feel my journey's worked perfectly for me and is a good example because we did, you know, I went through the license system first with the British Mountain Bike Federation. So my first races were only an hour long. And then I moved up a category and they were an hour and a half. And then I moved up a category and they were 2 hours. And then I moved up and they were 3. Then long races came about. And I started with a 6 hour and 4 hours and 6s and 4s and 6. And then, all right, I'll try a 12. Now I've been doing 4s and 6s for 3 or 4 years. And all these things kind of align because I'm getting tougher and tougher. I'm getting better and better physically. The training for the 1.5 hour race has brought my development to a point where it's not a massive leap to leap up to 2 hours. And I'm learning all the time where that point is where you are going a little bit too hard, so now you've got to go a little bit easier. I am learning where cramp came in for me. And I know that for you, cramp's a major thing. For me, cramp's always been part of my sport, but my development has always pushed it out slightly as I've gone. So now, you know, so in a 6 hour race, first time I did a 6 hour, I had cramp for the last 3 hours. By the time I was moving to 12-hour races, I wasn't getting cramp in 6 hour races anymore. Yeah. But I think it comes back to your line with time. You know, if I'd gone straight into 24-hour races, I almost certainly would still be wrestling with cramp. And people go into it and then there's this, right, how do we solve cramp for 24-hour racing? I have one roadmap for you. Start with cross country, then go to marathon. And like in 15 years time, you probably won't have cramp in 24-hour races. You know, a lot of my clients are in their 40s, 50s, 60s. They don't want to hear that they got to wait till they're 75. Yeah. So we need to find other ways through. So for me, it's trying to work out, okay, how do we compensate for the lack of time? Because time will solve most things with consistency. You know, and I look at athletes now say to me, you know, I get new athletes and they're like, I'll do whatever it takes. And I'm like, okay, give me 10 years. What? Well, that's what it takes.
Yeah.
You know, oh, no, I'm going to try, I'll train as much as you like for a year. Okay. Oh, no, that's much harder to do, you know? So for a coach, it's developing mental toughness in an athlete gets trickier and trickier the smaller the time frame gets, and the further away the goal is from where we currently are as an athlete, and further off the understanding of the athlete is as to how big that task really is compared to where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always equate that really to, you know, if you say to me, oh, I want to get to Las Vegas. Okay. So how do I get there? Well, the first thing you got to tell me is where you are. I'll give you directions from here. You got to drive to Heathrow, catch a plane. Oh, there you go, done. You know. Sure. No, I don't live in the southwest of England. Right. Okay. So this is the thing. You know, when we go back to mental toughness, I think is lots of people kind of, you've got two options. You can set yourself up for success by understanding what process you might have to go through, and then allocating it a time frame. And then depending on how important a goal is for you, you've got to decide what other things give. So, yeah. You know, if you think in the perspective of, you know, what you're producing in the fit professional is really, you know, I've always looked at it and thought probably anybody with the right training, application, motivation, dedication, all these things that kind of sound the same, but when you break them down, they're actually different things. If they've got enough of that, anyone can excel at one thing. It's possible. Like, it's not out of the realms. And that's what we do with pro riders. Someone does all that stuff. Someone picks them up and drives them to there. You know, someone gives them, they have a massage. Someone picks up the luggage. Someone sorts out the bike. You know, my mountain bike needs a new brake box. I don't go and fix that. I fix it because I'm a fit professional. But the pro, my brake needs brake pads. He's on the phone. Someone else comes, collects it. You don't even drop it off. Someone comes and gets it, takes it away, brings it back. They give him the other one. You know, they've got 5 each or something. You know, so we take all these things away. Mental toughness, physical toughness, all these things, they're easy to develop when you've got one thing to deal with.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually have in the can, I call it purposeful out of balance because of the sacrifices. I really learned it when I picked up my frequency with you and what my goals were, et cetera, is you as a fit professional, I don't have someone doing everything else.
Yeah.
But it becomes part of the training. It becomes, you can't get rid of everything, but you have to get rid of something. So
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Yeah, you know, so I always think like anyone can do one thing really, really well. Now, 2 things. Okay, you want to do 2 things really well. Okay, now you've got to start to think about the actual puzzle. You know, you get like, you are going to have some sort of organization. You're going to have some sort of allocation of time, and you're going to have to decide which one takes precedent at certain times. And this is where periodized training and things like this can be really useful. You know, then you move on to 3 things. Okay, 3 things is where most fit professionals probably are trying to be, I would imagine. When you've got like a 18-year-old, 21-year-old, they usually, for the most part, they want to be a cyclist. They tell me they want to be pro. They might be starting work, they might not, and they usually don't have a family. So for most, you know, so 3 things usually for most people who I coach these days, you know, it's work, family, sport. Those things. Now you've got to develop all the, it's kind of Jenga now. Or Tetris, you know, which blocks go in where, and you've got to move it quick, and you've got to have some sort of organizational structure to make this happen, because you can talk about mental toughness, or mental toughness in this respect is like, it ain't going to save you if you're completely disorganized. You leave everything to chance, like your average 18-year-old who I coach. What time, you know, I could phone up any of my youngsters and say, what time are you training today? Tomorrow. They'll decide tomorrow. All right, if I came around your house right now and said, we're going in 10 minutes, could you find all your kit? No chance. You know, so we talk about toughness. Toughness, when you talk in the concept of, you know, somebody who has more than 2 things in their life, part of mental toughness is having routines, having actual structure, knowing what needs to be where, when, so that everything aligns, and you're projecting into the future and going, right, so business is happening now. If I look at my Training Peaks account, for instance, it's 3 calendars. It's my training, my work, and my family is on my Training Peaks account. And it's worked. I don't cross-country ski, so I use the cross-country ski boxes for my son's got to go for his diabetic appointment. And we've got somebody viewing a house, because we're looking to buy a different house or whatever, So these are all in blue on there, So I open up my Training Peaks account and I'm going, what's tomorrow and what needs to happen? All right, what's happening? When's the race? There's a race then. I know that the bike needs this doing to it. That's got to go in then. I can't do it that day. So the bike needs to be going in on Tuesday. I can't be looking at it on Friday. You can either make life really hard for yourself or really easy for yourself.
Right.
Now, I talk about things you can have in your life, I don't know anyone who's good at 4. I know lots of people trying to do 4. I know lots trying to do 5 or 6. I don't know anyone who excels at 4. So for me, I think like the first thing for most people if they come to me as a coach and they say, I want to win TCR, I want to win the Swiss Epic or whatever it might be, any race at all, their local race or whatever, I'm looking at it and I'm like, I don't like to set people rigid structure. I want to learn them and find out what's coming out the other side and what are the roadblocks as we go. Because when everybody's keen at the start, they'll tell you anything. Like they just want you to make them win. but the reality of life, their life isn't that. So I'm kind of a detective to start with, and then we work on, okay, so the most common thing for me is athletes say to me, I'll do whatever it takes. And then you get their life and they're like, me and my wife are going away for 3 months to New Zealand and I'm not taking a bike. And like, dude, well, you must do some exercise, or it's just like, yeah, I do hockey on that day. I go to yoga on this day. And I'm like, I can't understand why I'm not getting any faster on my bike. And then I break it all down. I'm like, well, you ride a bike once every 2 weeks. So, so I think for most people, the first thing if you want to develop your toughness goes right back to looking at your actual lifestyle and going, what is it I really want from life? And do I really want this? Lots of people tell me they want to be pro. And then I ask them to describe a pro's life and they don't know what it is. And then where does the idea come from? Do you really, well, everyone wants to be pro, don't they? And I'm like, well, I didn't. I thought about it and I'm like, no, I didn't. Like, I'll do some coaching as well, and the opportunity was always there, and there were times when I was getting really good support and good money, but I was still doing something else that was I wasn't excelling at them, but I was learning something or doing something, and I wasn't just like, I've got to be a pro. That's how I ended up in the bike industry, actually. I had gone full time and I go training. Awesome. Come home. My wife's at work. What should I do? All right, I'll sit in the hammock. All right, I'll have some lunch. Sun's out. I'll go for a ride. I'm exhausted. Like, the coach is like, well, you're doing twice as much training as I've set you. And this comes back to your force. For me, I always look at, mine's always a bell curve. So whenever I look at anything, especially with training, I think in bell curves. Okay. Because the thing that's always been the holy grail for coaching has always been, what's the right amount of training? Because we do something, we do a bit more, we get a bit better, we do a bit more, we get a bit better, we do a bit more, we get a bit better. Do tons of it. I'll be awesome. I'll turn pro. Oh, I'm ruined. I've broken myself. And this is this is common. So common. Unbelievably common. So for me, performance is always a bell curve in my mind. I'm like, here, bad, somewhere here, optimal.
Yeah.
That's our dose. We're looking for that. But what is optimal? You know, for me at the moment, you know, if I look at me when I was 35, what was a week off is now a training week. Because the volume was so high, the amount of training was so high, and the stress was so high. That was the top of the bell curve, was right up here. And what I do now is down here, but that's actually the top of my bell curve now.
Yeah.
But what is an optimal stress for me to move?
Yep.
So, which comes back to, you know, I was saying about before we started the podcast, and you were like, how do you want to go? And I was just like, well, I freestyle and it develops. For me, with my cycling developed, I think the reason I can be nearly 50 and still compete with some of the younger guys in the national champs of the 24 is because I never really the past is done. For me, it's just done. You know, it's just like, those are all good or bad memories, but they're not a perspective on my performance in terms of where my future's going to be. So I always look at it, for me, it's just like, I don't go, you know, oh, I've been ill, I've had COVID, I've hurt myself, I've been injured, whatever it is, I've had time off because we've had a baby, so on. I don't go, oh, my FTP used to be X and now it's down here. For me, it's always, who am I today? Where am I today? I want to be better tomorrow. So better for tomorrow is there, better the next day is there, better the next day is there. And that's, for me, is always how you make progress with everybody. Yeah. All the limiters are always when I get somebody who wants to, you know, for me, it would be if I said, oh, 2016, my FTP was 380 watts. Now it's 280 watts. I want to be back at 380. Well, it's going to take a lot of work and it's going to take a long time to do that. And I'm, you know, I'm 7 years older now. Or, yeah, 7 years older, you know, and on the wrong end of the bell curve of age for where that performance is going to go. And I got to a very high level at some point. So I probably am trying to push up against the ceiling that is coming down. You know, if I hadn't started till I was 45, well, I'd still be heading up to reach a potentially coming down roof. So for me, it's always like, I always think about who I am today and I match. And for me, that's why when I go into a race like a 24, if I've committed to the race, my mental toughness is aligned with who I am today, not who I was one day, not how I used to perform, not that I coached the guy who might win's dad 20 years ago, and I'd known him since he was like 3. It's just, I'm here and my performance potential is this. So that's what I'm aiming for, this performance potential. The problem for most people in the race, and particularly at 24, is that they go into it with their head aligned with their previous achievements. So I won national championships last year. So this year I want to win the European championships. Forgetting that when I went into that race, I wasn't quite at national championships level, but every single duck aligned for me. A few people got it wrong, and I had a good deal of, I made my own luck, but I didn't have any bad luck either, and I became national champion. And I fought tooth and nail, and I could have pulled the plug on it at any time in the last 8 hours. Lots of people forget all of that.
Yeah.
They just go, I was national champion, therefore I should win. If I did national championships this year, I should win because I was national champion. That's when you become mentally, you know, you end up on that. And I think for me, that's really where, in my mind, where that concept of good pain or pleasure is, where you allow yourself to believe you're still as good as your very best performance. You know, I have people all the time come to me and they say, I'm time trialist. All right, what do you want to do? I want to do a sub 19 minute 10. I get excited. That's fast. You know, that's a fast 10-mile time trial. What's your fastest time trial? Well, I've done 24:28. 24:27 is a PB. If we get to 24:27, if we get to 24:19, you should be hopping up and down excited. You've been the fastest you've ever been in your entire life. But they're going to be disappointed for the whole season if they don't get a 19. that's just setting yourself up for bad times.
They're exponential performance curves. I mean, so many sports are that way where people can perform at a decent level, and the difference for where they want to go is it might not be in their genetic makeup, but it's just all the time and sacrifice and investment in that result is, like you said, they forget what all comes together. Some really cool things that I just like to talk about the crossover to the professional world. You talked about this whole idea that Magnus brings up. You know, he talks about amygdala firing, and I personally think that's an issue that I might have, but I also think it's very transferable to you learn how to control your freak out in the sport, like that last 8 hours you started to talk about. And there's certain coping things you do, but it's multi-dimensional, at least emotional and mental, plus your legs are burning or your back hurts or your nutrition's off a little bit, whatever it is. You can make really interesting corollaries to the professional world. So he uses the term respond instead of react. And you know me, I do not have the pacing gene. I mean, I really got to learn how to pace. And frankly, in my own world too, I tend to go. With me, I'll keep going. I won't be like the little kid on the track where they take off at a sprint and stop and walk. You know, I just keep going the best I can. And I've learned that I do much better pacing over time. So those experiments that you can do, frankly, in a world for sport, when we're a amateur athlete, if you take out the danger of a fall and screwing up your shoulders or getting a laceration or spraining your wrist, if you take all those things away, it's really not very high consequence. That's what I like about it. It's an interesting place to experiment. So the transfer then goes into your real world where you learn your limits with much higher stakes, like you said in those three things: family, sport, career, which is very much defines a lot of the fit professionals out there.
I've always felt with the crossover to real life is that if you're waiting to learn these things purely from life and not sport, to learn the same things and the same abilities that you might have to, the hurdles you've got to overcome and the thoughts you've got to deal with and the mental toughness you've got to kind of find in yourself or develop in yourself in the time scale of, say, a 12-hour race, for instance, it's going to take you a decade, because a race gives you this, it's hyper.
Yes.
It's like looking through something under the microscope. You have to, you know, you have people who they do things like the transcontinental, or they do the Great Divide or something like that. They come back and they have trouble adjusting back to normal life because they've gone through so many emotions, ups and downs. They've had to deal with all these problems. They've been your world comes down into this tiny little dot in front of you that you're focused on. All the other peripheral nonsense, you get no pauses. You're just, you know, in a 24-hour race, for instance, you're not taking any time off. There's no stops. There's no, it's bedtime and the new day starts. And you get all these things, and think like the power for me really of sport is that you can experience a whole, what at the time, you know, from trying to describe it's quite difficult if you've never experienced it, because you can't believe that anything in such a small time frame can actually change you physically and mentally so much. And but you come out the other side of an experience like that when you've overcome the hurdles that you encountered. You've ridden the last 6 hours of a 12-hour blown up, for instance, or with really low energy, or you're being sick, and you've just kept going, and you've kept going, and you, like, people love Goggins, don't they? Love Goggins and his overcoming stories. The power of those overcoming stories is that he's just learned what people who don't do these extreme things have to learn over 30 years. And when you've got that much time, often you miss those lessons because you don't have to learn them. You can shy away from them. You can take some time out from work. There's all these ways to avoid pain when you've got an endless time scale of a life, when you've got a race, well, you either deal with it or you don't perform.
Yeah.
And so that's the real, that's a real, magnification of learning comes from, that's where you get it through sport. And I think this is what I see in so many of the athletes I work with, why they transfer and they excel in other areas of their lives. And some who have stopped, some guys who were on my team who stopped racing, they're now absolutely excel in another area of life. In usually something to do with business. They're still active, but they're not racing anymore. But the lessons they learned in racing about themselves and what they can handle, and that this hurts, but it's not a problem, all transfer over in some degree. Sometimes we don't see the direct correlation, but it might be 5 years later, we deal with a situation. My wife always says to me, problem with a device for my son who's type 1 diabetic or something. And literally, I just go, what he's dealing with. There's no panic. There's no emergency. It's just like, and it's exactly the same thought patterns in a race where you go, my legs don't feel good now. Like bridge to engine room, what is going on down there? Yeah. All right, how do we do this? What do we do? And you're just looking for solution. All right, how good is the solution? Does it work? Can it get us? Can it bridge the gap to get the ambulance here or get to there? Or, and there've been a few situations I've been in now where either I was the lead rider on a group ride, or I wasn't even involved with the group ride, but I came across the group ride where somebody was very badly injured, and I've just gone, what's happened? He's there. You go do that. You go do that. You get this. You get that. You get that. Emergency services. He's sorted. Gone. And everyone's like, how does that happen? And for me, I don't think I was never taught that. It's not training, but it is. It's learning to deal with this super intense situation that for me has grown from being a 60-minute race to a 90-minute race to 24 hours. A lot happens in your head in 24 hours. You can overcome, second to second, you might want to quit for a whole 90 minutes. Override the script, override this. It's painful, but it's fine. It's painful, but it's fine.
It's a great example. You learn to respond when your amygdala fires and you're all emotional. Cognitive dissonance, right? Our ability to think, boom, shuts down, and we panic and we do dumb things, or we lose our focus, et cetera, et cetera. And the injured person on the trail a couple of years ago, actually on a place that I had lost a wheel and got a laceration on my arm. You can go on my Instagram and look at it. It's pretty cool. My military buddies say, only a flesh wound. But I come around this corner and guess what? I learned, I slowed down, and you take it better. But here's a guy who has got his new bike. It's actually a downhill bike, and he's not clipped in. And it's a crazy Arizona rocky section. And he had launched, and he was laying in the down, laying, but kind of moving an arm. I get off my bike. I actually put my bike way up. Like you said, I kind of went into autopilot. And another biker comes, and I said, do you want to go for help, or do you want me to? And we worked it out. Don't move the guy. God, he had blood coming out of his ear. It turned out he had multiple fractures on one side of his head. He broke his helmet, and I ended up getting the EMTs back in there and all this stuff. And same thing, felt really weirdly in control the whole time. And so I'm definitely, because I'm not a real blood fan guy, I really respect doctors and EMT people. It was weird, same as you. Great example. Still, it's a biking example where this ability to respond that we develop over time can transfer into your life. I mean, usually it's a lot more subtle. You have a customer complaint, a product doesn't arrive where it's supposed to, or worse yet, the wrong product arrives. It's in a package where they can't ascertain it's actually different. And now you have $100 million construction project with a week delay. That's no fun. But it charges the same kind of thing into your brain, and you need to learn to respond. And those around you, you need to learn to respond. Those are just excellent, excellent ideas. I'd love to hear you opine a little bit on this particular responding issue. You talked a little bit about the last hours of your race. Are those points where I don't know, your internal voice, or how do you get through them? How, besides the training, we know about the training and the conditioning that you talked about over time, but if you can take us to a challenging moment where you didn't
Okay,
blow
so
up, but you're damn close, you know,
the, cu-
especially emotionally or mentally.
the curious thing for me is that I can pinpoint the first time that I knew I had transferred to this way of thinking. I can pinpoint when I first realized I'd transferred to this way of thinking, but I can't pinpoint when it first happens and when I first started to feel and think this way. But the first time I remember, the first time I realized that this is how I now think, which had changed from at some point during my racing career. So the usual pattern of an athlete is and there's another coach who's got this concept of 3 levels of athlete. So we go through stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3, and I really like this model. She says that we start, and this is really something I've seen a lot. We start and we do it for whatever reason. Our friends do it, or we go get fit, or whatever. It's someone lends us a bike, whatever it is, and we do it, and we go, wow, this is fun. Like, this is fun and it's good. And I do it a bit more because it's fun. And actually, I feel quite good. I'm getting a bit fitter. And we start to see this progression, and it's enjoyable and it's fun. And at some point, not for everybody, but for people who are of a certain type, who like progression and they like to have goals and things like this, we transfer to becoming level 2 athlete, where the outcome is now a very big part of what we do. Okay, so we want to succeed. We want to beat our friends, or we want to win the regional champs, or we want to do a certain time, or whatever it is. We want to win the Tour de France, whatever it may be. And we transfer to this point. And some people stay there. That's the end of their journey. They stay as level 2 athletes. Now, the problem with level 2 athletes, at some point, if the development stops in level 2, it ceases to be fun anymore, because the outcome isn't being met, or we miss an outcome, or we have a setback. So now we're not happy about it, or we've decided we want to do a 19-minute 10, and we do a PB, but it's only a 22, so it's a failure. So we start to lose track of outcomes, become everything, and we forget enjoyment. When an athlete transitions to level 3, which is the ideal place to be, and you'll see, you know, if you see any interview with Nino Schurter, for instance, there's no doubt in my mind he's moved to level 3 a long time ago. It's fun. Yeah, he still wants to win stuff, but fun, it's got to be fun. It's fun. He loves riding trails. He loves riding really fast down this. He loves catching air, even though there's a very slim possibility you might roll a tire and not finish the race. And then the outcome might be. So in level 2, we start to see this kind of development of what happens. And for me personally, when I was a level 2 athlete, this is how races used to pan out. You go there with the goal. Where do I want to finish? How do I want to do? What do I want to achieve? You start the race, and you're either succeeding or you're failing towards that goal. Now, if you're failing and you're a level 2 athlete, you generally will fail from that point onwards during that race, because you've got no fun to fall back on, and you're not succeeding in the only reason for being there. Okay? And so the wheels start to fall off. You feel worse and worse and worse. And now I couldn't breathe properly. And you forget, like, you couldn't breathe properly last time, and you couldn't breathe like you would. For me, it's just like cross country is just like the worst race ever, you know. And I said to you, has anyone suggested shorter races? And you described why I don't do them.
Yeah.
You know, but when you look at that, if you're doing well, right, and you're a level 2 athlete, what happens usually to the psychology next? You wish the rest of the race was over, because I'm leading, and now I might lose this lead. And you see these riders, they're looking back all the time. They're not focused on what they're worried about losing. They're worried about losing. In road racing, the guys who are stuck in zone 2, they're the guys who chase down every attack because they don't want to lose. So if you're third cat racing is really difficult because nearly everyone doesn't want to lose. So it's impossible to get away in the break because every single break will be chased down by everybody. When you're in a first cap race, people are trying to win. Yeah. When you're in the elites, people are trying to win. So they're running their own race and it's fun and they understand themselves. So, but part of this equates all the way over into the rest of life. And the time I realized that I had transferred, and I don't think it's just an athlete thing, I think this really transfers into life. And, you know, when I speak to people who are amazingly successful in business, they've always transferred to this level 3 or whatever it is. I had actually broken my arm. So I'd fallen off a skateboard at age 40. I'd broken my arm, and then the radius was smashed into several bits, and it was all displaced. It hadn't popped through the skin, but it needed that pull to pull it straight. And so before that day, if you'd asked me in that much pain, what did I want to do? I just want them to fix it. I don't want to know about it. If you can put me under, I'll have it. Like, I don't want to be there. Like, I don't want to experience that. I actually wanted to experience the whole thing. I was just like, they were saying, I was like, I'll take enough of the oxygen so that it isn't unbelievably painful when I pass out. But I want to know what they're doing and I want to experience it and I want to feel the bone move. And so, so for me, that's really where the progression happens, where you become, you know, for me, that was where, you know, when I did the 24-hour race in years gone by, and when I was a level 2 athlete, you're wrestling demons all the way through because you're, you know, it's too long. Like, you get sleep deprivation, you get pain, like bits of you literally don't want to work. Like you go to get off the bike and like, whoa, like the bike was holding me up, you know? So, and particularly with a mountain bike, you reach a point in mountain biking, especially we have some awful muddy courses here where literally if you're in a team or it was a cross country race, you just pedal harder and get through there, but you cannot produce the force anymore. You can't produce the amount of power required to get from here to there across that muddy section. So you will have to walk this bit. It's not that you, at some point, it's just physically impossible now to pass this section. And there's 12 more hours. So every time I get to this section, I am going to have to walk this. And so people reach this point where it's like, well, now it's failure because this is mountain biking. You know, it depends what your personal perspective is. Each person has these, you know, I always like want to ask the athlete, what are your unwritten rules? You know, because your unwritten rules are usually the things that scramble you and ruin the race for you. If you've got a thing that everything must be rideable because you're an elite athlete and you're in a 24-hour race, you're probably going to bail at some point because you won't be able to ride it all. You will have to walk some of it, you know, and that's just how it is, you know. So people's scripts, if they're unwritten scripts. So for me,
I hope you enjoyed Rob's expertise on all these topics. In particular, a takeaway for me was the importance of consistency over time and the way that builds capacity so that you can get the next adaption. If you lose that consistency, you actually pull back and have to start over. And what was really interesting is to ponder how that can affect other parts of your life, including your career, as you add knowledge, skills, and disciplines. The next takeaway was really that we can't do all things all the time. When Rob talked about the ability to handle 3 things in his experience as a coach, and when his subjects add maybe a 4th, things start to unravel and fall apart. That's really quite interesting. And you can find out a little bit more about that in my Margin Max Minute, where I address purposeful out of balance, which is essentially that, making those decisions to decide what not to do so you can adapt and get the goals and objectives that you're really after. I hope that you will join us in the next podcast for part 2, where Rob will cover his technique of actually accepting what's horrible to come as a way to cope and really ramp up your game with mental toughness. He tells us through a story of a 24-hour national championship mountain bike race, which is just an amazing story in and of itself. Rob expands on the idea of of focus, using a great term that I'll save for him to introduce. It's just a great little memory jog to decide how to focus, what you should do and what you shouldn't do. The next aspect Rob spends a lot of time is to expand on the concept of what a level 3 athlete is. And we get into a pretty interesting discussion on how that overflows, that process, love, what you're doing going forward into all aspects of your life as one of the key components of the benefit of doing sport on the other parts of your life. And finally, Rob sums up discussing how the importance of a coach to really get to higher levels of performance is so important, not only for people that are pursuing something like a mountain bike goal, but also in our careers and in our life. What happens with coaching, how coaches are able to see the gains that are out there and properly pace the training and encourage consistency over time for much better endpoint performance, really in all aspects of our life. So I hope you'll join us for that next podcast. It's going to be really interesting. You're going to love to hear about Rob's experiences and how he brings these very important concepts forward with some great war stories of his career. I hope you'll join us. It's time to get to work.